Um, do you wish to? I'm bringing you. Just a reminder as well that during the hearing, anyone have it? Any host? On
no, far est, left, here.
Central
Good afternoon. I'm Karol Jakubczyk. David Simon, I'm the head of strategic.
Good afternoon.
contribution.
Tessie, I'm a consultant with ACOM and I led on the integrated impact assessment.
Chris Porter, Major Projects Manager at TfL.
Greg Newton.
Josephine Voss, London Plan Manager at TfL.
Patrick Clearwater in the London Plan team.
I get that.
Patrick Clearwater, planner in the London.
So just starting beginning of the thing on the vision objective. Asked a question there. Objectives, evidence, and do facing the interest hearing from how the council sees a main process.
Yeah, if I start, I think challenges that start the course, challenge of a call. our housing targets. The London plan sets out ambitious form to buy out. But it was clear that in order to communicate the challenge of to our significant challenge, how in which we've dealt with that, the characterization pins the spatial strategy, and what that did was it looked at the physical attributes borough, looked at what makes Lewisham special, the areas able to accommodate. This led to character, then informed spatial strategy. And I think figure 3 shows the transition between the character assessment, character-led spatial strategy. So that was one key area. The other key area is obviously mobility. Much of the borough well served by transport, and council working with strategic partners, Transport for London, have for a number of years opportunities and options to try transport links, whether that is the Baker Line extension, whether Surrey Canal Triangle station, with Clipper Line with combo, whether that's new and improved bus services, measures which are in the plan and in well. We're also aware, or acutely aware, of challenges of associated infrastructure to accommodate that growth. It's a key concern that so we've been working with our infrastructure providers process to identify what is required to school places, health facilities. Another fundamental or key issue is multiple of deprivation within the borough. There are, like a lot of London boroughs, there is diverse community and also diverse challenges. Some areas within the borough deprived London, and that is a challenge that we have sought to attempt to address through the local. For example, through identification of the area of regeneration to the south, recognise investment is required within that area, and having a strong policy. And these are all kind of summed up within the strategic objectives, following on from our clear vision. I'd like to note that vision and the strategic objectives have strong support from councillors, generally from
I think in terms of how the plan deals with this, it's very sort of sequentially set out. The strategic objectives set out under table 3.2, and which my colleague has sort of outlines some of the key areas that are covered in there, but I could include responding to the climate emergency, celebrating local identity and the health and creation of health and safety communities as other key objectives of the placemaking process. As I said, the plan addresses this iteratively and sequentially as it moves forward. It's very clear that the plan sets out a vision, the key objectives, which, as David alluded to, particularly in respect of the characterisation study, then translate through figures 3.1, 3.2 and 3.3 into the spatial strategy set out under policy OL1. That in turn, if you like, sets the overarching tone for the plan, and which is perhaps most, I'd say, best articulated through the place and neighbourhood policy approach, which basically strips down the spatial strategy into its five constituent components across the borough. Clearly, the planning policies that intervene contribute towards the delivery of these, or addressing these objectives in the sort of the core of the document. Again, more articulated in terms of place and neighbourhood through the site allocations that appear in that latter section of the plan.
Thank you. I'll note your comment about the vision objectives translating through into figure 3.2, the proposed growth strategy plan, spatial strategy. I'm not entirely clear how that's translated through, and whether it's a soundness issue is another matter. I did wonder whether there would be better linked chapters in terms of the objectives and the individual chapters, how they link through objectives. It's an observation, as I say, it may not necessarily be a soundness issue, but I think between objectives and
I think if I may, in response for the council, that there are, in my experience, there are many different ways to sort of produce a local plan, and whether that is a sort of a rigid and mechanistic translation of key objective topic areas under those that sort of regular and frequently encountered suite of chapter headings that one finds in plans, or whether it's a more, I think, all-inclusive approach that has been taken in Lewisham. I think neither are right or wrong, and if I can offer an opinion to the examination, that is almost certainly not a matter of soundness. It may impact on the effectiveness, but I don't believe that is the case with the Lewisham local plan at all. The issues, whether they're referring to climate emergency, transport infrastructure investment, are cross-cutting across placemaking. And I think if I can offer an opinion, a mechanistic compartmentalisation of those factors may not produce a document that is thorough. And I think perhaps, as my colleague David Syme referenced this morning, identifiable to the residents and communities across Lewisham. And indeed, maybe that was a criticism that could be levelled at the previous core strategy, which addressed those factors in that very mechanistic, systematic way.
It just struck me that there could be potentially just a diagram, even just showing those links through, just to sum it all up. So rather than having to necessarily refer to each of the objectives at the beginning of each chapter, just a diagram summarising those links between the vision objectives and the well, but again, it's not a soundness issue, but I think it might benefit the reader of the plan. So it could be an effectiveness issue, but that was just an observation.
Yeah, we're happy to take that away and think about that, a diagram which cross-references, particularly the policies in part 2 of the plan, how they then meet the objectives, I think is a fair point. What I would add to Carol's points is that we were also, in terms of the structure of the development management policies, the kind of bulk of the part 2, we were also looking at the London plan and its structure and trying to make sure that there was a bit of overlap in terms of reflecting the structure so that it was clear to both our development partners but also the public that there was some synergy there. But certainly take your point, and we can, in terms of a diagram which clearly explains how they link.
I think that would be helpful to improve the legibility, I think, of the plan. I don't want to spend really any longer on the vision objectives than we need to, because there are some important matters to get onto. I am conscious, and I will ask the Council, because we have now an updated schedule of modifications, which is quite new to us, isn't it? If you could flag up as we go through if there are any modifications proposed. As I say, we just received this morning too, so I think if there are any modifications to any of the objectives, policies, etc. is going through, if somebody could be proactive in drawing those to our attention. I am conscious in terms of the objectives. There is a suggested modification, MO8, in terms of objective 21, which I think came from TFL in relation to the wording of the objectives, so to include reference to increase active travel. So just to flag that up. I think it was raised by TFL, wasn't it? The proposed modification, it's really for the Council to answer, to be fair. Proposed modification MO08 in relation to objective 21, and I think it was in response to a comment made by TFL, which wanted to include reference to increasing active travel as part of objective 21, so to work in partnership with Central Government, the Greater London Authority, Transport for London, Network Rail and other stakeholders to reduce car use, increase active travel, and etc. I think that was the only proposed modification to the objectives. Just to clarify, the Council's happy to make that modification. As I say, if you could just make sure I don't miss any modifications as we go through, that would be helpful. Thank you. So I think that was probably read the written statements in terms of the Council's response to my queries regarding the objectives. So I don't want to spend any more time on those unless you had anyone had a particular comment they wished to make. So I think we touched on this morning in terms of the spatial strategy options, and in particular which strategic options were considered, and you know how those were arrived at. So if I can ask the Council to start us off on that.
Yes, I'll take that. I'll start. I think it's important to note, and again, making reference to the London Plan, the London Plan directs local authorities in the direction of growth. It effectively outlines that local plans should consider designated opportunity areas, of which Lewisham has 2 in the north of the borough, coming down to Catford town centre. It also directs growth in town centres, which are well connected along growth corridors. So in terms of genuinely alternative spatial options, what I would say is that the options are defined to a certain extent. And I think we also, as I said before, one of the key evidence-based documents underpinning the spatial strategy is the characterization study, which looked at character-led growth. And one of the key diagrams, figure 3.1, identifies areas of the borough that can accommodate growth. And drawing attention to figure 3.1, the areas between those yellow to red areas are essentially areas of conservation areas, areas of special local character, residential neighbourhoods which have a very strong character and open space. And whilst we are suggesting within the plan that there will be managed intensification within these areas, those are not going to physically accommodate the level of growth that we are required to accommodate. So, you know, again, what we've done is reflected the direction from the London plan. We have identified a spatial strategy informed by development sites which are deliverable and available to us to direct growth in areas that can accommodate that level of change and growth in our opportunity areas, in our major centres, Lewisham and Catford, in our district centres. We are suggesting a future opportunity area down in Belgreen, Lower Sydenham, again, in terms of availability of land, but also referring to the London plan, making best use of land and increasing housing. It directs local plans to look at particularly retail parks and sites which are dominated by car parking, which Belgreen is, and along growth corridors such as the 21 corridor that we've identified. So I frame that because the genuine alternatives for spatially different options within the plan is limited, and therefore what we're looking at is fundamentally about growth within these particular areas and the level of growth within those particular areas, which is then assessed through the integrated impact assessment. And then we have the big component of those options which were tested in the integrated impact assessment of the Bakerloo line extension. I think, as I said this morning, we are in a position where obviously there isn't the certainty on the funding, and therefore the local plan will be predicated on the delivery of the Bakerloo line extension, albeit the council is incredibly supportive of bringing the Bakerloo line extension to Lewisham. And that then leads on to the integrated impact assessment and the scenarios, the growth scenarios that we have assessed through assessment.
Okay, thank you. And obviously the integrated assessment sets out the 6 growth scenarios, which hopefully everyone is familiar with. In terms of the scenario 1 being a no BLE scenario with a baseline approach to densities, and they're looking at different scales of development to accommodating a full BLE extension in terms of phase 2. Within those scenarios, sub-area options were defined as well, weren't they? So I'm curious as to how those were defined. So, for example, within the central sub-area, the integrated assessment looks at 4 sub-areas within there. So Lewisham, Catford, the A21 corridor, and Hither Green. How are those sub-area options considered?
So in terms of the sub-areas, as I said this morning, when we were looking at how to structure the plan, discussing this with councillors and our community groups, one of the key points that kept on being raised was how do we make this spatial plan relevant to our communities? And one of the ways that we felt would be a useful exercise was to break or drill down into a bit more detail around the 5 sub-areas. So effectively the 5 sub-areas were defined through the characterization study. We involved our community groups, neighbourhood forums in defining and looking at physical attributes of those areas, whether that is a coherent architectural language or some physical boundaries to define the 5 sub-areas. That was then subject to public consultation, which is how we came about with the geographic areas of the sub-areas. And essentially what the sub-area vision and objectives are doing is taking the overall spatial strategy and providing a bit more detail to those. So there is no difference between the spatial strategy and sub-area strategy. They are just a detailed zoom in of those areas. And then when we looked at the policies for those sub-areas, we were essentially looking at the spatial strategy and considering and making a reasonable, informed judgment about what the key policies are within those areas. So, for example, the central area, town centres are, the significant growth areas, and therefore it felt, in our professional judgment, it felt right to have a policy on Lewisham Town Centre, Catford Town Centre, and then the A21 corridor, which was a significant north-south spine which connects both. And that's the assessment that we made through the document. To be very clear, that we did not assess alternative options at that sub-area level, because, as I've said, the sub-areas are essentially a detailed version of the overall spatial strategy that we have in the plan.
Yeah, I was interested, I kind of asked that question if you look at table 5.5, it gives a summary of various specific growth scenarios. And just to pull out a couple of examples. For example, Hither Green, it states no reasonable uplift option. I'm aware there have been representations in relation to Hither Green that actually there may be some scope for, for development there. So how is that arrived at? Catford, for example, there was the option potentially 20% uplift in Catford, which wasn't dependent necessarily on the VLE. It's just how those options have been arrived at, and for example in Catford, and it relates to a later question in terms of the decision-making process. At what point and how is it decided that there wouldn't be that 20% uplift in Catford, for example? And it's that kind of thing that I'm sort of slightly not clear on in terms of the decision-making process.
I think in terms of the uplifts and the options, obviously, effectively it's on a case-by-case basis, particularly around the growth areas. So for Catford, for example, in the production of the plan, we were preparing a Catford Town Centre development framework, which then fed into the local plan and provided a degree of certainty in terms of the figures and the numbers that we have within the plan. So similarly in New Cross Gate, for example, that's underpinned by the New Cross Gate area framework. So we had the kind of master plans, development frameworks there to draw upon. In terms of Forest Hill, again, it's about a kind of judgment and a professional judgment in terms of the capacities and the development densities that those areas can accommodate based on the existing character of the area. Officers, when we were looking at those densities and those indicative capacities, we were looking at the London Schla work that we did back through the preparation of the London Plan and making judgments and assessments on what those densities would result in terms of the built form, the density of development, the number of tall buildings, and whether that was appropriate, underpinned by our characterization study and underpinned by our work on tall buildings as well.
So just for the sake of argument in relation to Catford, what particular, was it just decided there wasn't the capacity there to accommodate a 20% uplift?
I think we were looking at the framework which was essentially being developed by the council with our developer partners in tow. So we've landed on a scale and development of critical mass in Catford, which seems right. What I would say is that we're making it very clear within the local plan that these are, in terms of the site capacities, that they are indicative capacities, and through the development management process, there will be a design-led approach. We imagine, and we are working with developers currently who are meeting and exceeding those indicative capacities in an appropriate way. But it is quite difficult at this strategic stage, particularly if there isn't the sufficient level of detail to apply a 20% uplift to, for example, Forest Hill, without understanding what the impact would be on the character of that place. And rest assured, the densities that we are applying to every site within the borough are high densities, are considerably high densities.
Okay, thank you. Of the various scenarios and options considered in the integrated assessment, touched on that scenario 1 is the one that has reached the spatial strategy of the plan, and just in terms of the growth scenarios that were assessed in the integrated assessment, table 5.8 sets those reasonable growth scenarios out in terms of housing figures. And I just wondered to what degree scenario that the spatial strategy and the totality of growth proposed in the plan is consistent with scenario 1 in terms of those figures.
My understanding, and Mark, maybe you can pitch in here, but in terms of our first scenario, which is our preferred scenario within the integrated impact assessment, that scenario does meet our needs for the plan period. We have looked at this as well with the buffer, and we have an update on that. But yes, the scenario 1 does meet the identified need for the period.
Because looking at the figure under scenario 1 in table 5.8, so 33,000 tree dwellings, the the plan is proposing, I think now with the updated figures, about 30,000. So they're kind of broadly similar, aren't they, in terms of that overall figure? But obviously we're looking at different time periods. What the integrated assessment was doing, but broadly similar, I would say, to scenario 1 in the integrated assessment. Which leads me on to the next question. You say that scenario 1 doesn't include the Baker line extension and the uplift from that. And clearly, and we'll hear from TfL in terms of the timing of the Bakerloo line, but my understanding is that phase 1 could come forward towards the end of the plan period. And obviously the housing trajectory does have some potential for uplift in the sort of areas which would benefit from the Bakerloo line extension. And I just wondered to what degree the integrated assessment has assessed that higher figure, the potentially higher figure, within, including that uplift from the potential increased densities arising from the Bakerloo line extension.
Apologies. Sorry, I'm not quite understanding the question. Apologies.
Well, I think my question is, the scenario 1 is the basis of the spatial strategy and plan, the housing figures in the plan. Table 5.8 sets out housing figures under the no BLE option under scenario 1, which is around 33,000. However, there is the potential, and I think the plan allows a flexibility to increase densities and uplift housing towards the end of the plan period if the Bakerloo line extension comes forward. Is that correct? And what I just wanted to check is that if that did occur, whether that uplift in the housing figures has been assessed as part of the integrated assessment.
Mark, do you want to answer?
Yeah, I think it's essentially scenario 6. So under scenario 6, we're in a world where there's certainty about BLE phase 1 and phase 2, and there would be that. So scenario 6 assumes that under that scenario, there'd be potential to uplift supply from New Cross Gate by 10%, Lewisham by 10%, A121 corridor by 10%, Catford by 20%, and Belgreen Lower Sydenham by 200%.
So the integrated assessment has assessed the impact of a high housing figure in the context of it. Albeit, I think scenario 6 is on the basis of phase 2. Coming forward.
That's correct, yes.
Probably unlikely from TfL shortly. I just wanted to clarify that, just in terms of, if that did actually happen, if it did come forward within that time, is it accommodated within the overall assessment? So that's helpful. Thank you. And just following on from that, really, I appreciate the plan is in a difficult situation given the uncertainty surrounding the timing of the BLE line, and it does allow the potential for increased densities, certain sites towards the back end of the plan. I guess from my point of view, I'm struggling to envisage how that uplift will be achieved. I think particularly if there is developer pressure to bring forward the sites which could have increased densities on those sites prior to the phase 1 of BLE being delivered, then the opportunity to facilitate those increased densities may be lost if those sites come forward in advance of the BLE line. I was just interested to hear how, because there's no phasing mechanism in particular in the plan to kind of address that.
I think with the work that we've just done in terms of looking at the residential uplift in relation to the buffer, which we will come on to at a later date, we did look at that. And in particular, now one of the specific sites is at pre-app stage, and we do think that will come forward quicker than what we had anticipated prior to submitting the plan. And we have adjusted the house trajectory to account for that. So we've actually knocked off the additional uplift on that specific south of the borough. The other sites at the moment, we don't believe will be brought forward in advance of the BLE this stage.
Sorry, when you say you've been off the potential uplift, have you just standard kind of potential uplift, which could benefit from increased transport?
Yeah. So at the bottom of the housing trajectory, there's a few lines there which show the 5 or 6 sites in the south of the borough. One of those we do believe is now going to come forward quicker and removed that extra uplift. Obviously, the site will come forward at the relevant capacity through the development management process, but we've acknowledged that now it probably will be in advance of the BLE.
I was thinking if all of those sites potentially come forward before the BLE extension, then the opportunity, I guess, to have those increased densities has been lost potentially. I appreciate the difficulties trying to include phasing mechanisms within plan.
Yeah, if I may, and come in here, I think, and hopefully this is evident by the site visits that you've undertaken. What I would say is that in New Cross Gate and in Lewisham Town Centre, those centres are already served well by public transport. In fact, they are excellent in terms of public transport, and therefore the densities that we have applied to that through through identifying the indicative capacities are significant, talking 350 to 450 hectare, which is very significant. But we are aware that developers will be coming forward and are coming forward, suggesting to go above and beyond those indicative capacities. And you know, it's through the development management process and the design-led process, as per the London plan, where we will assess whether that is acceptable or not. Once again, I reiterate that we are a very pro-development borough, and therefore, you know, we are accommodating of appropriate high-density schemes within the borough. I think if the question is how do we capture the uplift in some beneficial way, I think we are looking at that, and you know, through the kind of pre-application and development management process. I think, as Angela says, we have, in terms of the 20% buffer, we've reviewed the sites, looking at the 5-year land supply, and looked at sites which can be realistically delivered within the 5 years, and is there any potential uplift on those sites, and where there is, we have identified those. And then finally, I'd just like to make the point that in the area to the south of the borough, where we feel is the greatest opportunity for density uplift, Bell Green, Lower Sydenham, the landowners of those sites have suggested that it is likely to be the latter end of the planned period before they are, you know, anywhere near looking at developing their sites, which is advantageous for the borough and advantageous for TfL, I'd suggest as well, because we will then have more certainty in terms of the timescale and delivery of the Bakerloo line extension, but also we will have the time as well to appropriately master plan that area in a comprehensive way. and I'm sure we'll hear from colleagues in Transport for London in terms of the timescale. And although this project seems like it is far away in the future, my understanding is that the approval processes and the commitment for funding are going to be, relatively in local plan terms, relatively soon, and I'm sure TfL colleagues will give an update. So we will have certainty through the plan period. And I think it's also important to note again that I absolutely accept that the plan covers a period till 2040 and that we have to have a robust plan, but the Council is intending to meet its obligations as set out in the NPPF and review this plan in a timely manner. So we should have maybe one, maybe even two London plans revisions by the kind of end of the plan. Certainly we would have a review of the law.
Encouraging to hear, thank you. Just playing devil's advocate for a moment. You're saying that a lot of those centres where the uplift is envisaged as a result of the BLE line are well served anyway by public transport. So what would why wouldn't it be possible to run with higher densities in those areas if they are well served by transport? Good things anyway.
It's definitely a good challenge and one which you're not the first person to ask as well. So I think we have to accept that connection to the tube line, the tube network, is a significant step change for any borough. We are not accessed, or we don't have access to the tube line currently. And what that does is it opens up, a huge amount of opportunities for our residents and for existing residents. So we do feel, despite the fact that those centres are well served by public transport, that an uplift would be possible. I think what we'll also see with greater certainty is sites coming forward, windfall sites, and sites coming forward in a more timely manner as well, facilitated by the BLE and the certainty that we're hoping will be said in short order.
I recall reading somewhere, probably very late at night, so you might have to remind me where, that the GLA would not have been happy running the sort of higher growth scenario in the absence of the Bakerloo line extension. Is that correct?
Yes, I think there is, and again, I don't want to speak for my colleagues here in TfL or GLA, but I think we have gone through a process through the London SLA about looking at appropriate densities, and those were publicly available by the GLA. I think there would be concerns if those, particularly in, say, the growth scenario 6, which looks at significant increases in growth. If we were running with those numbers, there would be concern. I suspect there would be concerns that, again, without talking for Transport for London, that there would be concerns that the opportunity to capture any uplift as a result of the structure wouldn't be there, because we were essentially delivering those in front of or forward of the Bakerloo region. As far as I'm aware, obviously the London plan policy is quite clear in terms of densities. The density matrix has been scrapped from the London plan, and it is very much a design-led process, and where there is appropriate design and design quality through that pre-application process, and I'm sure our GLA colleagues would welcome the additional housing. And indeed, we are working on sites which are referable to the GLA, which are seeing uplifts on our indicative capacity are happy to support.
Okay, thank you. I just want to come back to a point that we touched on this morning in relation to the decision-making process for the for selecting the preferred scenario 1, in terms of the integrated impact assessment. I mean, obviously the planning practice guidance states that the SA should provide conclusions on the reasons the rejected options are not being taken forward and the reasons for selecting the preferred approach in light of alternatives. Now, Section 6 of the integrated assessment provides quite a comprehensive commentary and analysis of the pros and cons, if you like, of each option. But then Section 7, entitled Developing the Preferred Approach, I think gives a very, very, very brief summary of how those options were, how the preferred approach was selected. And I think there are a few areas where I feel that there hasn't been an acceptable reason given. It's certainly, I think it's possibly just not articulating it properly within Section 7. But given the preceding analysis of the pros and cons of the various options, and also I think looking at Table 6.1, where the higher growth options do actually, you know, they do actually do quite well in terms of the impact assessment. I think the reasons given for going with scenario 1 aren't as comprehensive as it could be. And I think in particular this issue of Catford. So the summary states with regards to scenario 2, which would see higher growth without the BLE.
It's the final
yes,
sentence.
so that is the Catford uplift, isn't it? So, which would see higher growth without the VLE. This is a reasonable scenario to explore, but it's not supported as a preferred option. But actually, then no reason is really given for why it's not the preferred option. And I think it's that lack of reasoning, I think, in rejecting some of the options that concerns me. So I think that's kind of where I'm coming from in terms of that decision-making process and the extent to which the integrated assessment has informed the selection of the preferred option, as opposed to slightly retrofitting potentially the preferred option to the integrated assessment. And that's something I just wanted to explore. And it may be that the reasoning process just hasn't been properly articulated as assessment.
Yeah, I'll say a couple of things. I think that sentence about why scenario 1 is favoured over scenario 2, I think it's fair to say that could easily have been 2 or 3 sentences or its own short paragraph. But perhaps it's a sentence because it's arguably fairly obvious the reasons why scenario 1 is favoured over scenario 2 from looking at the appraisal matrix. It's largely the significant difference in performance under the historic environment / heritage, character and culture heading. So that row within the appraisal matrix. Scenario 2 performs notably worse than scenario 1. But I couldn't say any more than that because it's ultimately for the council to weigh up the pros and cons of scenarios. And just to add a couple more things, it's worth being clear that these same scenarios were appraised and consulted on at the Reg 18 stage as well. We did revisit the process of defining scenarios. So if you were to do a comparison of Section 5, which is defining growth scenarios within the Reg 18 interim report and the Reg 19 final report, they're quite different, that we did quite a lot of work to think again. We generally did think again about what are the reasonable growth scenarios, but we actually came to the conclusion that they were unchanged. So the Reg 19 ones were as per the Reg 18 ones. So yeah, that's, I guess, a good thing in some ways.
It seems to me that the analysis in section 6 presented to the and then the council just did this very short paragraph in relation to how those in terms of how that preferred option was selected, and in my mind there needs to be more of a narrative on that in terms of why certain options were discounted, and I don't think it is necessarily apparent from that one.
Just add one more thing on a procedural point, if helpful at all. The requirement is to provide an outline of the reasons for selecting the alternatives dealt with. And I don't want to appear defensive, but it's worth saying. So section 5, defining growth scenarios, and it's actually a lengthy section with a lot of work went into it. The legal requirement, you only to quotes out, you're looking to arrive at outline reasons for selecting those 6 reasonable alternative growth scenarios. Equally, I believe it's fair to say, in light of legal precedent, the aim of section 7 is to present, quotes, an outline of the reasons for selecting the preferred growth scenario and rejecting the other 5.
Reading the planning practice guidance, which states provide conclusions on the reasons of rejected option. Reason for selecting the preferred option in light of alternatives, and I think the Catford scenario really does stand out as not being fully explained as to why that wasn't taken forward. So, at the risk of generating another action point, I was going to ask the council if they could just expand on the reasoning in section 7.2 in terms of the selection of the preferred option, and in particular why other options were.
Yeah, we can definitely take away that and do that. I want to reassure you that there was extensive discussions on the scenarios and what the preferred option should be. Which we were at the kind of workshops with Mark and his colleagues discussing around the table at the regulation 18 and 19 stage. So I think it's maybe just about clarifying that position and providing a bit more articulation for the reasons for that decision.
It's just that it's not properly presented, I guess, in the integrated impact assessment. I think that can be addressed, as part of an updated integrated assessment as we move forward with applications, etc. But certainly, as somebody coming afresh to the plan, it's not apparent to me how that was the preferred option was selected. And I think that's where you guys have been working very closely on it for a long time. So it's probably very obvious to you, but I think it just needs articulation, really. Right. That concludes my questions on the options, the spatial strategy options. We can move on to policy OL1, spatial strategy now. I'm happy to take soundings on whether people are happy to continue for a little while before having a break, or we can break now before moving to policy. Well, happy to continue for a little bit. So in terms of policy OL1, does the plan adequately set out an overall strategy for the pattern, scale and quality of development as required by paragraph 20 of the NPPF? If the council could answer that question in relation to paragraph 20.
policy OL1, open Lewisham, delivering an open Lewisham. Council consider, I think, in accordance with our answers to the MIQ on this matter, meets the requirements of the NPPF under paragraph 20. It does provide a strategic position and vision for the local plan and how growth will be delivered. I think, in addition, as we have been discussing this afternoon, I think it very clearly sets out the spatial strategy in terms of the places across the borough where growth will be directed, the hierarchy of those places and the extent of growth that will be directed to those places. That is clearly set out under figure 3.3, which itself is then, as we've discussed, translated across the remainder of the plan, particularly in relation to the neighbourhood and place policies that appear later in the plan and introduce the site allocations. I don't think there's very much more I can say beyond that, at the risk of sounding brief. Yes, it meets the requirements of MPPF Para 20.
Okay, thank you. And is the spatial strategy consistent with the spatial development patterns set out in Chapter 2 for London?
Yes, as I said, the London plan is quite explicit about where development and growth should be located within London Authority's local plans. That is around opportunity areas in town centres which have good access to public transport and along growth corridors. So spatial strategy responds to that, and as Carol says, it focuses growth and development within opportunity areas, within town centres and along key growth corridors. And then, as I've mentioned, we have identified Belgreen, Lower Sydenham as a future opportunity area because of its capacity to change and because we think it's a suitable location for comprehensive redevelopment to the London plan. GLA are happy with our spatial strategy. In the statement of common ground, they outline their support for the plan.
Just moving on. In terms of the question 3.14 in relation to growth nodes, how were the growth nodes in policy OL1AA identified? What evidence is to support them? Are they adequately defined in policy OL1 in text and these maps?
The council's provided a kind of written response. I can repeat to MIQ 3.14. So the growth nodes, effectively the evidence base underpinning this is the characterisation study, which informed the spatial strategy. There is a hierarchy, I would say, of potential growth areas within the borough. And those growth nodes are identified under figure 3.2 and figure 3. Those are generally focused around town centres, districts and some local where there is development opportunity, there is available land in relation to our site allocations.
I think it's a point that hasn't been made. That there is a temptation to think that it's an obvious point, but I think nevertheless it is worth making. Lewisham is a place and particularly the new local plan is a plan that hasn't been developed in a vacuum. It is a document that has history to it, and indeed the growth nodes themselves, as well as contextually, many of them being identified through the London plan, are places that are logical places to accommodate growth, and that have been coming forward through the plan making and decision taking process as places that accommodate growth historically. So this plan is the latest iteration of placemaking that's been taking place, over the last 20, 30 years. It's not developed in a vacuum out of nothing. And I appreciate that is an obvious point to make, but it's worth making.
I think it may be, again, a case of where the council has been working on this plan for a long time. You're very familiar with the plan. Obviously, coming to the plan afresh, and looking at spatial strategy, there are a number of sort of regeneration types of areas. So we have growth nodes, we have growth corridors, opportunity areas, strategic areas of generation, and it couldn't find anywhere that actually explained what growth nodes are, either in that they're on the map, but they're not in the. It doesn't really explain what growth nodes are in the policy or the supporting text. So the growth corridors identified and opportunity areas, but I couldn't see reference to growth nodes. I think I was just thinking, well, how do all of these different designations relate to each other? How are they all interconnected? What is a growth node? And it's not actually explained in the supporting text that I can see. And I think it's probably, again, just a case of to articulate it. But I mean, please do help me out if it's in there somewhere and I've missed it.
Yes, Carol can, he's looking up and doing a search. If it isn't in there, we can definitely articulate that through any modifications. But I think just to say, there is a kind of hierarchy that we're establishing here. So the regeneration nodes, which are effectively down the central spine of our spatial strategy, are those areas that are either located within the opportunity area and are areas which have a cluster of significant site allocations. There are two major centres, opportunity at Deptford, Creekside, and then the growth nodes are those areas which are either local centres or district centres, or sites which have a strategic nature, which can accommodate significant well, but are not of the same scale and significance as our major centres such as Lewisham and Deptford. If that isn't clear, we can certainly go through.
Yeah, I think one of the things I'd flagged up that isn't defined, and that was a really helpful explanation as to the difference between them in terms of scale, and I think it would be useful to articulate that. It wasn't clear to me, but bound to be corrected.
And we can definitely have a look at that, and as I say, we're happy to make modifications to make that clarity more apparent. I think it's also worth saying that generally we have had overwhelming support for our spatial strategy and for the locations which we are accommodating growth. There hasn't been any significant challenge in terms of trying to meet the challenge of growth and where we should locate it. The council firmly believes that locating growth in well-connected places that can accommodate growth that have deliverable sites is the best strategy. But I take your point, and we'll take a look at that.
So I think the council would begin by acknowledging that there is no definition of growth node within the glossary. That is factually the position. For the examination's benefit, the term appears 32 times across the length of the plan. However, I think what is clear to me, and I accept that after a year and a bit with Lewisham, I am familiar with the document. What is clear to me is that there is, particularly in how the term appears within the site allocations, that there is a degree of clarity what it constitutes and how it interrelates to the delivery of growth through specific site allocations where that designation, that terminology is applied.
Just picking up a point your colleague made. I mean, obviously, Part AA is clear that development should be directed to growth nodes, regeneration nodes, etc. Is it clear, though, that there would be a slightly different scale of development in growth nodes compared to regeneration? Is the policy clear? Having explained that, is the policy clear on that point? Because that probably should be in the policy as opposed to supporting text.
I think reiterating the point I made, as someone who's read the plan on a number of occasions, and I think the differentiation, particularly in the site allocations, is there. But I accept that it could be possible to clarify that terminology further, possibly through a discrete reference in the glossary. That would certainly be the approach I would favour.
I think in terms of the scale of, I think the concept of those designations, if you like, growth nodes, regeneration nodes, I think those concepts need explaining in the supporting text. I think just from a legibility and effectiveness point of view, I don't necessarily want to, it should be apparent really from the policy and from the supporting text rather than have to go looking in a history. And I think in terms of the scale of development, differentiating between the scale of the development, that definitely needs to be in the policy. Not that the glossary doesn't necessarily form policy, it's a policy itself. Policy obviously takes precedence of supporting text.
Yes, we can definitely look at that. Just for clarity, in terms of scale of development, what I wasn't suggesting is height, because obviously these growth nodes have different characters. They're established places. What I was meaning was the scale of opportunity in terms of the number of site allocations clustered around these nodes. The development that comes forward within Forest Hill, for example, which has a strong established character, is a conservation area, will be entirely different to that of Surrey Canal Triangle, for example. It doesn't have that strongly established character. But we can take on board that and kind of definition.
I think that would be useful. I don't know how the council feels in terms of the differentiating between the scale of development and the various designations, whether that needs to be done. Obviously, it's an urban area, so it's not like dealing with a rural area where you'd have a more distinct settlement hierarchy. Or whether directing new development to growth nodes, regeneration nodes, etc., is sufficient in terms of where new development.
I mean, I think we would favour the latter. I'm thinking the former would get quite complicated in terms of a diagram, so that we have a hierarchy of opportunity in terms of the clustering or number of site allocations, plus a hierarchy of development type, nature, scale might be, again, introducing too much in terms of the plan. And I think it is clear that how this feeds through into our site allocations and the sub areas. So the site allocations have indicative capacities which respond to key constraints and considerations of character, conservation areas, other constraints. So hopefully that is then clear in terms of the opportunities for the site allocations. I am nervous about introducing another layer of hierarchy within that spatial strategy.
Sort of thinking aloud, it could open a can of worms, couldn't it, in terms of modifications and consultation on those modifications. But I certainly think in terms of the supporting text, it could help to clarify the role. So that would be. And are the opportunity areas clearly defined in Policy L1 and the policies map?
We hope so. They will be clearly defined in the policy map set out. They are defined within the plan. 01 identifies the opportunity areas under figure 3.1. There are 2 established designated opportunity areas with borough, one which covers the north of the borough, Lewisham, Catford, and the second one which covers Deptford Creekside and Greenwich, which is outside the borough. We believe that these are clearly defined, will be clearly defined within the policy map.
To clarify, other allocations in the north and central areas which are out with the opportunity area.
Question. Yes, it's the shaded blue spatial strategy.
I only ask because it's not in the key to the figure 3.3 borough-wide spatial strategy plan. Looking at the key, the opportunity areas aren't on there, they're on the preceding.
Apologies, yes, they're in figure 3.2, the strategy. 3.2. It's the pink colour.
What's the reasoning for not including the opportunity areas on the spatial strategy plan? Just the potentially complicating the too much.
I think that was the case. I mean, with these diagrams, what we were trying to achieve is a sort of clarity, and it's a balance between providing everything on the plan and providing that clarity. I think we tested options which looked at a boundary of the opportunity areas within that diagram really was confusing. We felt that it was clearer in strategic diagram figure 3.2.
I can understand, the reason for that, but if the opportunity areas are, key to the delivery of the overall spatial strategy, should they be on the spatial strategy plan? Are they on the policies map?
They are, yes, yeah.
They are quite a key regeneration mechanism away, aren't they? So I wonder whether there's a way of accommodating them on the spatial strategy map.
We can certainly do that and try to get that balance between clarity of the diagram. Sure we can have it.
In fact, looking at the two diagrams, I can't get them side by side, that most of the allocations would be within that opportunity area. Can't say definitively.
Yes, I think that's the case. I think all of the site allocations within the north sub-area, all of the site allocations with central area, with the exception of maybe one or two around Hither Green, are within.
Okay, thank you. Is the scale of development within the plan in those opportunity areas consistent with the scale of development indicated in Table 2.1 of the London Plan, which sets out an indicative capacity for new homes and jobs?
It is, yes. Carol, do you want to?
The risk of sounding.
I mean, do you have a breakdown of the figures in terms of the allocations within the opportunity areas, so that I can, in terms of both housing and employment, so I can definitively write in my report that the scale of development is consistent with those opportunity areas?
We could certainly seek to provide the examination with that breakdown.
I think that would be helpful. I think you've answered my question in terms of the regeneration nodes, and we've discussed that obviously they need defining more clearly in the supporting text, and also in terms of how they differ to the growth nodes. So I shall leave that. There. Just looking at the time. Before we move on to the strategic area of regeneration, be a good time to have a break. Come back at 3:45. Welcome back, everybody. I wanted to get a cuppa to get refreshed. Just now moving on to the strategic area for regeneration set out at OLB. I think it would be helpful if the council again could just give a little bit of background to how the strategic area of regeneration was defined, and just say a few words on whether it's adequately identified in the policy supporting text.
Yes, I can pick that up. So I think the background to this and the context to this was that an area of regeneration was previously identified in the adopted core strategy, June 2011. And I think this formed part of the Council's approach to responding to an area of deprivation, of particular deprivation in the south of the borough. I have to confess that the core strategy back then had this as a fairly nebulous kind of not very tightly defined area and didn't have a policy, a particular policy associated with it. Nevertheless, the council felt that, again, because of the key issues of deprivation within that area, as well as issues around public transport accessibility, that it was important to bring that forward through to the new local plan and more tightly define both its geographical area, and that was done by looking at a kind of ward level analysis of the deprivation characterization study, but also to underpin that with a strong policy basis as well, which is found in the sub-area strategies, the policies for the south of the area. So those areas include the neighbourhoods of Bellingham, Downham and Bell Green, as well as an area to the east, Grove Park. And again, these were defined as kind of areas with particular issues in terms of deprivation. I think it's fair to say that there are limited site allocations within that area, and the council acknowledged that as the local authority, we're going to have to look at an alternative approach to investment within that area. It won't, or it can't easily be resolved or a solution provided in the same way as maybe some of the other areas can be when we have site allocations and areas that are capable of being regenerated more comprehensively, so that the strategy there is going to have to be targeted. Nevertheless, as part of the local plan, we see a real opportunity, particularly for small sites within that area, to include kind of managed sensitive intensification, and then also looking at public transport improvements to the south of the borough as well. Also, this links in with the kind of opportunity area and the distribution of centres that we have, and we feel that there's a real opportunity with, as we've identified, a future opportunity area of Bell Green, Lower Sydenham, to provide that critical mass and that change in character, to provide a kind of local centre and a draw, particularly for Bellingham and Downham, which is adjacent to that opportunity.
I think for the, if I may, Inspectors Malloy and Bust, for the benefit of the examination, I'm rereading the Council's response to MIQ 3.19. I would also cross-reference to subsequent responses by the Council that relate to the opportunity area, the strategic area for regeneration that are raised and responded to in relation to Lewisham South and Lewisham East area, which provide further detail and I think which correspond more closely with David's response just now. So that's just for information.
You mentioned about sort of having to take an alternative approach, and you recognise that there aren't as many site allocations in that area. Is that largely due just to lack of available land?
Yeah, so these areas are generally characterised by kind of garden city character. They have a strong post-war character, which is very attractive, but also very established, with significant diverse land ownership within those areas. We've looked at particular town centres and district centres within those areas as well, and there's no real identifiable site allocations that we can identify. There's no sites being put forward through the call for sites, so there is very limited, just by the nature of the physical attributes of the area, there's very limited scope for comprehensive change.
So the strategy would be one of bringing forward smaller sites and also renewal. Is other sort of programs for estate renewal, improvements of town centres, that kind?
That's exactly right, yes. So small sites intensification, estate regeneration, which the council is leading on at the moment and has delivered intensification within some of our estates to the south and has plans to do more of. And then also the town centre strategy for improvements, as well as public open space strategy. We have an adopted open space strategy which identifies key parks and green corridors within that area, which have been translated into the local plan, which require improvement. We have funding streams which the Greening Fund, Section 106 and SIL, which in part will be addressing some of that.
You mentioned the potential for another opportunity area. Just expand on that.
Yeah, so the opportunity areas are designations which are designated at a London plan level. And we've been in discussion, collaboration with the GLA around the sites of Belgreen, Lower Sydenham, a collection of rather large sites which are currently the two main landowners. One is Sainsbury's and a large surface car park, and the other is a retail park, again, associated car park. And again, the London plan directs local authorities to identify these sites as site allocations within the local plan, which we've done. But we think that the scale and nature of these sites, together with some of the issues that will inevitably have to be overcome, including some of the transport issues, road network issues, some of the infrastructure that needs to be improved within those areas, health centres, provides a very strong basis for this to be a future opportunity area. If it is designated as an opportunity area, there's also the benefit of opening up funding as well through the GLA to develop an opportunity area framework, a master plan in those terms, to guide development for the future as well. Not to mention that the preferred option from a council's perspective of the BLE is that it runs all the way to Bromley and would serve this opportunity area in the future. Yes, it doesn't. The strategic area of regeneration is much larger in its scope and geographical area than area.
Okay, thank you. And that explanation was a very good explanation of what the strategic area of regeneration is. So thank you for that. You know what I'm going to say. I don't think that's necessarily explained in the plan itself. In terms of the strategic area, the opportunity areas are explained, growth corridors are explained, the strategic area of regeneration isn't explained. And I think because there are so many designations, it would be helpful to the reader of the plan to know, you know, what they are, what their role is, what they're trying to achieve. So a very similar point to the one I raised in relation to the other sort of designations as well. Is that, and I think your explanation summed it up very nicely. Is that something that we can add to the action list for you to do in terms of?
Yes, I think there is a policy within the document which is LSA2, which is Strategic Area for Regeneration, which is the same designation. It is in part 3 of the plan, and I think maybe that is where it's something that we need to address, and maybe we need to have a summary, as you've mentioned, within the supporting text for the spatial strategy to draw out clearly what.
And I think in doing that explanation, just a different role to other designations. I think that certainly wasn't clear to me in reading the plan. You know, coming to it afresh. The other matter I had on strategic areas for regeneration, the figure 3.2, the growth strategy plan, shows in the key strategic area for regeneration, pale pink. Now the spatial strategy plan, figure 3.3, doesn't refer to the strategic area of regeneration. It does refer to regeneration area. Although I have to say, just given the scale of the plan, it's not entirely clear where those regeneration areas are. So again, it's just a consistency point of view, and by all means help me out if I something there.
No, we can take a look at that in terms of the plan. I think this is very similar to the opportunity areas and the balance that we were trying to strike between having a lot of information on the plans and having all the information. Certainly take that away and have that on the spatial diagram.
Me that it's quite a major part of the overall regeneration strategy, so I think it needs to be reflected on the spatial strategy plan. So I'm sure you have a whiz with GIS who can make it make it come to life on the plan. Okay, thank you. Just in relation to the hierarchy of centres, I think this will be touched on in more detail in the employment and retail section next week. But if you could just briefly summarise how the hierarchy of centres has been defined.
Yes, sorry, yes. So obviously, again, we have the London plan, which sets out the kind of spatial hierarchy of certain centres. So it sets out the metropolitan, which to the borough does not have any, but has aspirations for Lewisham Town Centre to meet that threshold. Major centres and district centres. And then we have pulled through and re-examined our local centres and our local parades, see if they're called local parades or shopping parades, but local parades, which we've done through the plan process, and then we have an associated map at figure 8.2 centre hierarchy that clearly outlines that hierarchy and kind of reflects that hierarchy.
But just in terms of the of Lewisham potentially becoming a metropolitan centre, the plan's just really giving a wink and a nod to that, isn't it? It's not. It would have to go through the London review to establish that.
Yes, correct. Yes, I think there is the wording within the London plan. Carol, correct me if I'm wrong, but the wording in the London plan does say that Lewisham is a major centre, brackets, with aspirations to be metropolitan. So there is reference to our aspiration to be metropolitan centre, but you're absolutely right. It would be a London plan review.
That's entirely correct. I think furthermore, the statement of the statement of common ground with the Mayor of London reflects that position. There's a clear acknowledgement that it would be for the next forthcoming London plan process to consider that potential, and indeed I think it's clear through the new local plan spatial strategy that the new local plan supports that aspiration through its spatial strategy, planning policies and site allocations.
Okay, thank you. Just moving on to the A21 growth corridor, Council just briefly summarise how that's been arrived at.
Yes, no problem. So the A21 effectively serves as the principal north-south arterial route within the borough, and it connects to the A2 north of Lewisham before linking Lewisham and Catford major centres and then continuing towards Bellingham. When we looked at the characterisation study and looked at the evidence base prepared by our consultants through that process, it was clear that the A21 dissected a lot of the key regeneration and growth nodes that we had identified, but there was also an acknowledgement that particularly in terms of meeting the council's requirements for small sites and windfall, that this corridor, which is relatively well served by public transport, and particularly those areas such as Catford Town Centre up to Lewisham Town Centre, are certainly seen as opportunity areas that could be intensified over time. And indeed, we are seeing that through windfall sites coming through the pre-application process and application process on Rushy Green, for example, the street that connects Catford to Lewisham. And we felt that we needed to recognise that and identify that as part of our commitment to delivering our small sites targets and that significant step change that the London plan was targeting. So we identified the A21 through the characterisation study. We identify within the London plan its important strategic route and function. We then prepared an A21 development framework, which essentially looked at the key sites, excluding sites which were already master planned or in the process of being, such as the Centre Free, to see what the potential for development and uplift would be there, and that fed through into in parallel with the site selection process and site allocation.
The policy in DD refers to using the healthy streets approach. I just wondered what status, what is that? What status does it have? Just if it's been referred to in a policy, does it have formal status as an approved document?
So the Healthy Streets is a TfL initiative, which is within the London Plan, and yes, it is pretty well adopted and accepted for all our development partners. It's an approach which encourages sustainable forms of transport, providing the opportunities, improving transport corridors for those particular sustainable modes such as walking, cycling, and public transport.
It has formal status in the
as part of the London Plan evidence base. So we can provide links to that if you want different documentation, or we can provide the bits that were the evidence base for the London Plan as well.
That's fine, thank you. There's no need for that. I'm just nervous of including references to documents or strategies which don't have a formal status, but that's clarified that particular point. The policy also refers to other strategic growth corridors, which again I was just a little bit confused on as to where those are, what are they defined on the plan? So is it just a similar point to earlier?
Yeah, so the strategic growth corridors are again corridors which dissect the borough, east-west corridors, which are identified in the spatial plan. I think they're identified in figure both in figure 3.3 and in figure 3.2. And again, these are key corridors within the borough, which again are kind of capable of change and could accommodate development from kind of windfall sites, small sites, that type of thing. Three. If they're not clearly identified, then we can take that away and make sure that they are clearly identified.
The supporting text at 3.16 refers to several major roads, A20, A205 South Circular, so they are explained in the text. I don't know what to degree those are reflected on the spatial strategy diagram, but on the figure 3.2, the growth strategy plan, there's transport corridor improvements. There's a slightly different terminology. So I just wondered whether that's one and the same to the growth corridors, or do they serve a different purpose? So it's just that clarity, really.
Yeah, we can provide that clarity when these diagrams in a whole. You have identified a number of issues which we can take away and clarify and improve the quality of the diagrams.
Transport improvement, the transport corridor improvements in figure 3.2, are they slightly different to?
They do align with the growth corridors that you've identified there in supporting text, yes.
So there's possibly a terminology issue there. Is it? I think a growth corridor is slightly different to transport corridor improvements, which could just be improvements along that particular road or whatever, as opposed to necessarily a growth corridor, which implies sort of development along that. Just being careful with the terminology there.
We'll take that away. And yes, I think there's an acknowledgement that these corridors, which we do want to improve the public transport on, are the corridors where we see growth could take place, and I think we just need to clarify that within the diagrams and within the supporting text.
Yes, in the interests of being helpful to the examination, in respect of healthy streets, I would refer the inspectors to submitted document PD19, which details, I think, almost completely all of the external documents referenced across the length of the new local plan, and includes a hyperlink to healthy streets.
That's okay, thank you. I think it's difficult to argue with the overall strategy in terms of focusing development in those growth nodes and transport corridors and things. I think it's just about getting the terminology right and explaining the strategy. Really, that's the main issue, rather than do with the approach itself. Clarify. Okay, moving on to the Bakerloo line extension. You've been sitting waiting very patiently there. I will ask the council this question first, because it is the council's plan, but I will ask you to come in after that. But from the council's understanding, what is the time frame for the completion of the Bakerloo line extension as referred to in policy OLE?
I may look to my colleague Julia to provide the kind of details on this, but obviously we've been working for a long time in partnership with our colleagues across the table to bring forward this strategically significant project. My understanding is that, and of course you can appreciate that the timescale has shifted and changed, particularly due to the COVID-19. But we are expecting that works could be on site early 2030, with construction being completed towards the end of the planned periods, towards the kind of 2040, the end of 2030s to 2040. Julia, if I've that's incorrect.
I would concur with that.
Clarify, would that be in relation to phase one?
Well,
those
the,
timescales?
the question, and I think, again, our colleagues from Transport for London will clarify this. So the council is fully supportive of the Bakerloo line extension in its entirety going to Bromley South as a single phase. That is something that we've been looking and certainly promoting as a complete project. Obviously, within that project, there will be a kind of phasing issue, but we want to see it in its entirety. Now, again, Chief will sort of clarify the timescales, but as we understand it, the business case for particularly going to Bromley South is particularly robust and strong. And that is what we have been promoting as a local authority. But again, happy for our colleagues, Transport for London, to respond to that. And also, I noticed that Julia's got her, who is the key Bakerloo Line person as well.
Just a point of clarification, it's to Hayes in Bromley, not Bromley South.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Sorry.
It's to Hayes in Bromley, not to Bromley South.
Apologies. My local station.
Okay, thank you for that. It would be interesting to hear from Transport for London in terms of your understanding of the timescales, at what stage the work is at. And I think in particular, obviously we have that there are a few documents out there setting out the broad approach and promoting the BLE line. In terms of the timing and phasing, are there detailed project plans available which set out in more detailed
Yes, so I think the first thing is David and Julia are correct, so they've passed. In terms of timing, we have a clear programme to delivery, which effectively would see the scheme delivered by 2038. Now that accounts for effectively 3 options. The first option is phase 1 only, which is an extension to Lewisham town centre, or slightly beyond to the Wearside depot, which is where we would be turning the trains around. That's the scheme that has been consulted on repeatedly and is protected by statutory safeguarding directions. There is also the option to deliver phase 1 and 2 concurrently, and that could also be delivered by 2038. The reason for that effectively is that you'd be looking at broadly 2 geographically distinct areas of work, and the critical path is the tunnel between Elephant and Castle and Lewisham. So you could do them at the same time. Third option is effectively looking at the phases consecutively. And the reason for that is, although you could do them at the same time, it does import additional cost and risk, particularly around affordability. So you could do one and then the other.
Sorry, can you just recap on that third option?
So that would be to do phase 1 and then do phase 2 afterwards, whether that's the next day or 5 years later. The reason we may wish to do that is around affordability or risk. So there may be reasons for doing it in that order. And in that case, you could deliver the first phase again by that 2038 date that I mentioned. I think, as with any scheme of this size, there is inherent uncertainty around that programme. Any large-scale development dependent on things like funding, planning, further public consultation, decisions around contracting, delivery approaches. We're confident we can do that, subject to those points, but there is that uncertainty there. We are comfortable it is deliverable, and that's informed by a lot of work we've done recently. As an organisation, we've got a lot of experience in delivering schemes like this. The Northern Line extension opened a couple of years ago, Crossrail, Barking Riverside, a new overground extension in East London, Silvertown Tunnel's currently going. We've learned a lot of lessons and understand what went right and what went wrong on those to inform our thinking.
There is a confidence, so I'm looking at that time scale of completion by 2050 is realistic. Now, in terms of certainty, is that based on, which option is that based? Phase 1 and 2 being delivered at the same time, or?
So just to give a bit more context, the stage of work we're at the moment is we're looking to close out this current stage of design, which is where we'd want to reach our single preferred option. This phase of work is due to run for about 18 months. That's fully funded. At the end of that, we'd expect to have a view as to exactly what we want to deliver. Were we to go further than Lewisham, to do phase 2, that would be subject to further public consultation. The last consultation we did show overwhelming support. As David mentions, it has a very good case. We think it stands up, but we would want to go and do further consultation before we confirmed that. Therefore, I think we have most certainty over phase 1, but we are confident we could do phase 2 at the same time, should that be the outcome of the work and supported by public consultation.
Okay, I mean, certainly from the documents which are in the public, there aren't those detailed timescales set out in very kind of high level, broad brush document. Given that there is potential for the extension to be delivered even towards the end of the plan, and that I know the plan isn't predicated on, but there could be uplift in terms of housing sites, as it could impact strategy. Yes, it's just a question of certainty and having the evidence that the deliverability of that in that time frame. I hear what you say, but I don't necessarily have that evidence in say that it, you know, in terms of funding, is the funding in place? 1, do you have funding? 2, how do you intend future funding? It's that kind of information, I feel.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. At the moment, we are funded for this stage of work. That takes us through to a point where we effectively make the decision to move on to the next stage. Beyond that,
when you say this phase of work, you're not talking about phase 1, you're just talking about the preliminaries.
Effectively this design stage, which takes us up to the end of our feasibility design and confirmation of a single preferred option. We don't have funding committed for delivery, albeit that's not unusual for schemes of this scale. Usually you wouldn't be expected to have that confirmation, full confirmation of funding until you submit for, this would be a Transport and Works Act order, at which point we then submit our funding statement and the evidence of a reasonable prospect of funding. There are elements of the scheme we are currently delivering early, so we're doing earlier work looking at and getting the new trains for the existing line, which is the first step for the extension. We're also delivering the facilities at Elephant and Castle to enable the future Bakerloo line extension. So the first bit of the BLE is already under construction at Elephant and Castle, which is the ticket hall lead station there.
And is the work in terms of the sort of design stage, is that, could it be made available?
We can provide a programme which sets out where we are, the current stage of work and the future stages that would follow, with all the caveats that come with that, but yes, we can do that.
I think that would be helpful for the examination, just provide more certainty in terms of timescales and how it may impact, I think, plan and department in the appreciating that likely to be reviewed, but we still have to. I am conscious that we will be back to this in action. Just picking up though, point made AWS and Sainsbury's, who pointed towards a lack of retail time instruction. I guess that's picking up points, and I think that again is probably that evidence is there. It's just not.
I think I would say we have done extensive public consultation on this scheme. We've consulted 3 times, 2014, 2017, 2019. Had close on 10,000 responses to each of those and a raft of information. At the 2019 public consultation was what provided the evidence to the Secretary of State to allow the route to be safeguarded. So there is a lot of information that has been done and extensive public consultation and engagement.
In terms of safeguarding, is it just one?
Yes.
And from a TfL point of view, what's the preferred option in terms of the expansion? Would it be to deliver expansion? Is that realistic?
It's certainly realistic. We need to confirm that through the work we're doing and the public consultation. In terms of value, in terms of affordability, it is better to do it sooner, do it all as one, but there are other constraints we'd need to consider.
I think it would certainly help if you could supply that additional information. I appreciate there will be speciality, so it just depends how much information you can provide in terms of that timescale, funding, etc., just to set that out very clearly. Benefit that. Just coming back to the council, I think the council is treading a fine line in terms of not basing the spatial strategy entirely on the BLE extension, but giving it recognition. And I know it has been picked up by other participants that the policy OL1 does refer to the delivery of the Bakerloo line extension, supporting and enabling growth in opportunity areas in Lewisham southern areas. And I guess it's that whether it should be included, if that's not third option that was looked at in terms of the integrated assessment, whether it should be included in that policy if the plan isn't predicated on coming forward.
Yes, I mean we have had several discussions about this. We strongly feel as a council that we're obviously hugely supportive of the Bakerloo line extension and the benefits that would bring to our residents, and we feel it would be somewhat odd not to recognise that within the spatial strategy of a plan that could conceivably be or is within the kind of period that it could be delivered. In terms of the MPPF, I think there is recognition that we should be identifying strategic infrastructure and planning for strategic infrastructure. I take the point about the uncertainty, but I wouldn't say that was an uncommon scenario for projects of this scale and nature. So the council strongly feels that it should be within our spatial strategy and it should be front and centre. Again, I just reiterate and make the point that when we do get, certainty, there will be or should be another London plan in place, if not just round the corner. And we certainly be in the process of reviewing our plan anyway, in accordance with NPPF. Period.
It's just that the inherent tension really between the scenario 1 assessment, which it assumes no BLE extension. That's very clearly stated that scenario 1 is the council's preferred option at this point. But that doesn't include the BLE extension, but there are a number of references to it in the plan. And which is understandable, but I think it's just that tension between it being included in the plan, but the scenario 1 not affecting it in terms of the integrated impact assessment. It's just slightly contradictory, I think.
On the IIA, just really quick point. That section 7, where it's the council, the decision maker's response to the appraisal of the 6 growth scenarios. The first section says scenario 1 is the scenario. Obviously, I will paraphrase, but scenario 1 is supported. But the second sentence then says, but we also need flexibility to respond to a possible BLE. So just being clear on that.
I wonder again whether it's just the way it's presented, which reflects that the need for that flexibility without necessarily including it so definitively in the spatial strategy. Maybe the wording of that could be slightly changed to enabling growth resulting from the Bakerloo line. Did that transpire during the plan period? I'm just trying to think of a way quite so definitive as mentioned in Tirani.
Yeah, we could look at the wording. I'm looking across to my colleagues at Transport for London, because we have gone through quite a bit of iteration on this and looking at the wording around this. I do know that there is a precedent in the form of Southwark as well, whose local plan identifies the Bakerloo line extension as part of their overall plan. So it might be worthwhile bringing Tim in terms of that adopted plan. But yes, clearly it's been identified as an area of concern. We can take that away and look at it. But I would say that we do feel quite strongly that it should be within the plan as a significant infrastructure opportunity for the borough. And I maybe we can have a look at the wording around that, but it would seem odd not to include it within the spatial diagram as it's such a significant opportunity.
I don't necessarily disagree with it being in. I think that there is some tension there with the integrated assessment selection of scenario 1, which quite clearly states that it's a no BLE extension option. And I think it's just that it's a little bit contradictory, and that's worrying me a little bit. But I think it's about the plan enabling the flexibility, isn't it, to include that and respond to that opportunity should it arise. I think the wording criterion E, the delivery of the Bakerloo line will support and enable both an opportunity areas. I think if that was slightly reworded, you can still keep the reference to the Bakerloo line extension in, that it could possibly be reworded about of enabling that, just to I think because there is that inherent conflict, you don't really want to be open to challenge on it. So I think it's just being careful about how. Maybe something that would be helped by how you explain selection of your preferred options as well, which obviously is on your action point list. Could use that to explain a little bit about the approach to the Bakerloo line extension, I think, and maybe look at the supporting text as well to reflect that difficult balance that the plan is trying to achieve in supporting the Bakerloo line extension, but without the entire strategy being dependent on it, which would obviously put the strategy at risk if it didn't transpire in the plan. I think it's just about getting that balance and acting that in form of words, which they.
Okay, yeah, we can take that away, and in terms of resolving that, suggest that we forward
The wording in. Take this down. Looking at the wording in terms of the reference to the Bakerloo line extension in criterion AE, I think you need to think about the wording. I don't want to put wording in 2 miles about that, but I think just ensuring it reflects the need to respond to the and provide flexibility and reflect that it may or may not happen, because I think that sounds quite certain. And also include explanation in the supporting text to reflect that uncertainty and but providing flexibility for it to come forward. And also, I think in terms of your explanations for selecting the preferred option in in the integrated assessment as well. I think that would help to explain your reasoning on it, because I think you are treading a quite difficult path in terms of trying to support the extension, but without basing your entire plan extension happening. And I think it just needs quite careful explanation.
Okay, we can take that away, yeah.
And I think it would be helpful as well in terms of just explaining that should the BLE line come forward within the plan period, there's flexibility in the plan to deal with it in terms of potential uplift, but also that the integrator's assessment has actually assessed that potential BLE. I think that's gone through the SA process. Just help to protect.
Yeah, we'll take that away and we'll have a look at the wording, and we'll also integrated impact.
I fully appreciate the importance of including it in, because I think that helps to support the project as well and secure funding. I think it's just, as my colleagues said about protecting the plan as well from potential challenge. So hopefully we can find a form of words that will. And if we can have as an action point as well, to provide the additional information in terms of the funding and the design stage and the planning of the Bakerloo line extension through the council. just looking at my next question, I think we covered this a little bit this morning and earlier on in our discussion in terms of whether the plan adequately identifies the development opportunities that may arise as a result of the Bakerloo line extension, and how these would be phased, to kind of unlock the benefits of the Bakerloo line extension. And obviously there is that flexibility in terms of the additional housing and potential uplift in densities. Just coming back to that, has the council considered potential phasing to look at phasing in the plan to align with the early extension?
We haven't, no. It's not something that we have considered. Again, our approach and our stance is that the growth identified within the London Plan is not predicated on the delivery of the Bakerloo line extension. Noted that there is that flexibility and kind of uplift. The key areas that will be affected by the Bakerloo line extension, as we've discussed, New Cross, Lewisham Town Centre and Catford Town Centre, and potentially Catford Town Centre in a phase 2 or phase 1, phase 2 concurrent scenario, as well as Belgreen and Lower Sydenham. We've obviously looked at marginal intensification within those areas, with significant increase in intensification within Belgreen, Lower Sydenham, which provides the greatest opportunity, one would argue, for uplift. Given the connectivity and the public transport accessibility of the likes of Lewisham Town Centre, for example, what we're seeing is, high density developments coming forward there, albeit we recognise that with a degree of certainty from the extension, if we are getting that certainty in 2020-30, then undoubtedly we will see developments coming forward which meet and exceed our indicative capacities. And again, there is the inherent flexibility within the plan already. We're very clear that these are indicative capacities, and through a design-led process, through the development management process, we will end up with the best possible solution. The key area of which I think the council was considering effectively a kind of an alternative approach was Lower Sydenham Belgreen. I think we discussed this earlier, that it is advantageous that those site developers don't necessarily have the immediate interest in developing their land, albeit these are absolutely sites that we should be identifying through the plan. They are brownfield sites which are sheds essentially surrounded by car parks. So they are sites that we feel are deliverable in the long term. But in many ways it is helpful that those are towards the end of the period when we should have greater certainty on the Bakerloo line extension. So sorry, that's a long answer to say a short answer, which is no, we hadn't considered a phased approach to the plan. I think we are confident, and we are wanting to see investment and development within the borough. We want to see developments such as Lewisham Shopping Centre, for example, moving forward. We have willing developers who are bringing these sites forward. So the council doesn't necessarily see the need to
And just to put it another way, if those sites were to come forward sooner, would that cause a problem in terms of the overall strategy or the plans for the BLE extension, sort of broader vision, if you like, for those areas?
From a council perspective, no. We are seeing, for example, certain strategic site allocations within the plan coming forward now through the development management process, and we are, appraising those on their merit through that pre-application process. And again, those sites that are coming forward are meeting and exceeding our indicative capacities within the draft local plan. We don't necessarily see an issue with that. I think the only concern, I guess, from a council perspective and from a Transport for London perspective would be, how do you capture the value or the uplift associated with even the inference that the Bakerloo line extension could be delivered, which again I accept is a tricky balance. But again, the council doesn't want to hold back investment and development within our town centres, and that is why we have been quite clear that the plan isn't predicated on the Bakerloo line extension, whilst we are very, very supportive of delivering it.
If I may just jump in, sorry, I should have put that up. I think there's probably two sides of this. One is capturing the value, as David puts it, which is a funding question, something we are considering and looking at, but it's not the key driver behind the scheme. The key driver is really around the value and the benefits, both in terms of homes, jobs, also productivity, journey time, so there's a range of value. I think we expect the scheme to generate more interest in homes. If some of it comes forward earlier, there is a risk that it isn't as dense, you're not getting as much as you otherwise would, but there are benefits that would still accrue to the existing and new populations. So it's something that we're not hugely concerned about, albeit we would like to capture as much value and generate as many homes as possible. I think the other point is certainly on the phase one route, the safeguarding is in place to allow us to deliver the scheme. There are some large sites that, because they are required to deliver it, wouldn't become available for development until the scheme is complete or very nearly complete, at which point you then are able to develop those in the knowledge that the scheme will be there and in conformity with the plan, particularly around New Cross Gate and Lewisham.
That's helpful. I'm conscious of time, and we're going to be revisiting this subject on Thursday. So if there aren't any questions at this point in terms of the spatial strategy and the effect of the BLE extension, move on to the next question, which is whether Policy 01 gives adequate guidance for areas outside of identified growth nodes, the regeneration nodes, opportunity areas, etc. And if so, how would these areas be dealt with, which don't fall within those designations?
Yeah, I think we've touched upon this, discussing other elements of the spatial strategy and also the characterization study. And, it's important to note again that the areas that fall out with those nodes and corridors identified in the spatial strategy are areas of established residential character, which, as I've discussed, is unlikely to come forward for significant development and change. Nevertheless, we have got a small sites target to meet. We do clearly promote the kind of small sites. We have an individual policy, policy HO02, which is our approach towards small sites. And what we are seeing for those areas that are beyond those areas of opportunity areas, etc., is managed and careful intensification. The council has also got an adopted small sites SPD, which again encourages the delivery of small sites in the hope to diversify our delivery as well from small builders and developers. So we feel that the policy, particularly around the small sites, is clearly geared towards those areas that aren't covered by strategic designations within the spatial strategy.
Okay, thank you. I think I hear what you say about the small sites policy. I think in terms of the spatial strategy in OL1, I think there's just a bit of a vacuum on those areas outside of the designated growth nodes, etc. And from what you're saying, you know, there would still be scope for some development in those areas, but of an appropriate scale. And I wonder whether it's worth just articulating that, because the spatial strategy covers the whole area. Whether it's just worth articulating the approach to areas outside of those defined areas, to be clear to people reading the plan, to be clear to the public and developers what the approach is.
Yeah, certainly we can definitely do that. Yeah, we can take that away and have a look at that in terms of a modification that or a suggested modification that looks at specifically addressing those areas outside those identified designated areas, and make reference then to small sites.
I'm conscious the HBF have put forward suggested wording for that, for modification, but obviously, which may be a starting point, but obviously it's the word.
Yeah, I think we looked to the London plan as the starting point for the wording, which again I think is quite similar to the HBF word correctly about the promotion of small sites within areas within walking distance of stations, etc. And fully supportive of that policy. So if we may, we can take that away and look at
keep forgetting. Yeah, I think the HBF touched on Hither Green. So in terms of the policy being silent in areas like Hither Green, and again, you know, you've explained very clearly what the council's approach would be to be articulated in the policy.
Yep, we'll do that.
Are the housing, employment and town centre allocations, you know, the areas for growth in the spatial strategy consistent with the parameters discussed in the integrated assessment, both at that spatial strategy level and the sub-area level?
Yes, the council considers that the housing, employment and town centre allocations are consistent with the preferred assessed scenario referred to as scenario 1. Yes, I think these are these growth scenarios are high level, as we've identified within our written response to you, but nevertheless they are you know, based on the actual site allocations and the apportions of homes within each of the sub-areas, which have then fed into the IIA. Mark, is there anything?
Yep, just to add that within section 5, defining the growth scenarios, it's section 5.4 that pulls things together, and within section 5.4 there's a discussion for each of the 5 main sub-areas, and then some of those sub-areas are broken down into sub-areas, as you actually touched upon earlier in the day. And yeah, under each of those sub-area / sub-area discussions, all of the allocations are discussed before a conclusion is reached on whether there is it's possible to foresee an uplift option for that sub-area. So, for example, Hither Green, you did raise as an example earlier. There's I just checked it a moment ago. It just says that there are 2 allocations here, one of which is permitted, and the other one is small and somewhat peripheral. So there's no clear case at all for departing from the kind of the baseline or standard density assumptions. Therefore, Hither Green, it's no uplift option is progressed to the reasonable growth scenarios, i.e. it's held constant across the growth scenarios.
I think the integrated assessment refers to it as a top-down and bottom-up approach. So we've looked at the broader strategic picture, but also actually looked at capacities using, in the town, in the urban areas, and also taking into account commitments, because there are a lot of sites which are already under construction, which takes away, in a sense, the flexibility to change the distribution of housing to a degree. And is the overall spatial strategy in general conformity with the London?
Yes, so I think there was some concern from the GLA in terms of their Regulation 19 representation. That was specifically around the employment issue and the strategic industrial land designation around the BDU site. I think Carol's explained that we've done a huge amount of work with the GLA, additional evidence-based work to reach a position where the GLA are happy with, subject to the modifications that we have submitted, that they are happy with our approach and are generally supportive of the spatial strategy, which is reflected in the Statement of Common Ground.
If I can just add, and at the risk of splitting hairs and being pedantic, whilst the Greater London Authority's comments to the Regulation 19 publication make reference to concerns with policy OL1, they actually throughout that entire process never offered any suggested amendments or actually directed us to where they believed the policy was not in general conformity with the London plan. Again, without wishing to split hairs, the subsequent negotiation process that has resulted in the Statement of Common Ground with the Mayor acknowledges that they have no beef with policy OL1 or the spatial strategy. They, in fact, very clearly and explicitly state their support for our spatial strategy, and that consequently the proposed amendments are to policy EC2, which is perhaps where their concerns are more appropriately directed.
It's our job to split hairs and be pedantic. Just looking at the modifications, I was slightly confused. I know the GLA made representations, which I think you've touched on, in terms of policy OL1 setting out the quantum of planned growth, or having a table set out which shows the quantum of planned growth within within the sub areas, and that was suggested as modification, but that appears to have been struck out in the up-to-date version of the modifications. Is that something
that is correct, and overtaken by events in relation, so initially acknowledged by the council upon submission, because that is when that's the point of time that proposed modification dates from. There's a lot of water flowed under the Greater London Authority Bridge since then, and the agreed position is as set out in the Statement of Common Ground with the Mayor of London, and that the modification is focused upon policy EC2.
And I would actually find it quite helpful to have a table with the sort of broad quantum of growth. I've obviously asked if you could provide that for the opportunity areas. Dividing it by the individual designations may be quite hard, though, if they are overlapping with the designations, the growth modes, etc. Kind of overlap, don't they? And they're within opportunities areas and so forth. So is there a way of it be done on a settlement basis, maybe, in terms of, or a area basis, in terms of providing a table with? It would certainly help me for housing figures, and for me to be able to see that the quantum of growth, the distribution of growth, is consistent with it.
We do have in table 3.1, I believe, in part 3 of the plan, that sets out the level of housing growth per sub-area. I don't know if that's helpful, or perhaps if it needs to be repeated earlier in the plan as well.
Yeah, just to add, I think we had discussion where the best place was to put the overall figures, and I think we came to the conclusion that because some of these growth areas and corridors overlap, that actually, as part of the spatial strategy, that would be quite a challenge and difficult to do, which is why, as Angela says, what we've done is we've prepared a table, which is in part 3 of the plan, which identifies for each of the sub-areas the overall figures, and then leave the total number.
Sorry, what I meant to say was table 13.1.
That's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think as long as it's in the plan somewhere, and presumably that will need to be updated as well to reflect the recent work on housing trajectory.
Yes, I think it has been included in one of the modifications already, but it does reflect the most up-to-date trajectory.
I address these. MO10 in relation to criterion C3. Get there. think it's just a typo. In terms of typographical errors, in terms of the format of the modification, we would generally ask you to group together modifications for a single policy, for example. So rather than have a modification for each of the individual changes to a policy, it would be one modification reference number for the whole policy. And normally a typographical error would be an additional modification, but it makes sense, I think, if you're changing the policy, just to include it in the just to keep things neat. So just to flag that up at this in terms of the format of them. Just checking we've covered everything I wanted to cover. Are there any other points in relation to the spatial strategy? Everyone's exhausted. Well, we haven't done too badly, 7 minutes past 5. So just to say thank you all very much for your contributions. And we shall adjourn until 9:30 tomorrow morning to consider the housing target